Hello everyone, thanks for tuning in to the 17th Take, a project brought to you by the Community College of Philadelphia's Communication and Media Studies program and CCP-TV. As college students, we're coming together to dig into the stories, experiences, and issues at the heart of Philly's people, neighborhoods, and communities. Coming to you from 17th Street in Spring Garden. My co-host Mary Murray and I are here today to discuss not only the evolution of local journalism, but the power of local news sources, what happens when we don't have them, and how we can make sure that we don't end up at 1 in 50 million. So imagine we're in a world where you don't have access to information that's happening in your local communities. We're talking things like City Hall, local board meetings, even just a local event like a concert, no access to it. Now this seems pretty extreme, but it's not impossible because more and more people every day they're starting to just go to digital media, and that's hurting the local news sources. Our local news publications are on a decline, not just in Philadelphia, but in just America as a whole.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
According to local news initiatives, more than 3,500 newspapers have stopped printing since 2005.
That's crazy.
This leaves many neighborhoods in a news drought with little to no coverage on their local communities. A quarter of these newspaper losses were just in 10 metropolitan cities alone, with Philly being in the 5 top most affected. That's crazy.
That's super crazy.
50 million Americans live in a news desert, defined as a place with 1 or even 0 news sources in their local community. That number is astonishing. When nobody is watching and reporting on what is happening where we live, the door is wide open for corruption within the government because there is no need for transparency or accountability, which is really scary.
That's terrible. But as we all know, nothing just starts on a decline. It was thriving at one point. So what actually caused the start of the decline of local journalism?
With the rise of digital media being used since the early 2000s, it has led to a decline in advertising revenue, even higher production costs, and a dwindling readership rating from the consumer.
That's okay. So I have some numbers here. So according to the Brookings Institution, from 2008 to 2018, newspaper advertising lost 68% of its revenue, basically 70%.
Wow.
Like, imagine if you lost 70% of your main income.
That's awful.
What would you do,
It's really scary.
So, while an amazing invention, digital media was unfortunately the beginning of kind of the downfall of local journalism. So, of course, that's going to change the business model of everything. So let's look at that really quick. So back in the day, pretty much everybody had a local newspaper because there was so much profit there. All the advertisers, again, that's their main income. All the advertisers, they flocked to the newspapers. And as the digital media came in, social media, the internet, these advertisers are like, why go to the newspapers if all the people are just on Google, on YouTube, on Facebook? So,
Yeah, it would be pretty hard to operate when losing more than half of your income. It's actually surprising that we still have any local news sources at all with those numbers. That is really good information.
Right. So without that extra revenue, local newsrooms just can't handle it, and most of them shut down. And if a local news room shuts down, that also hurts our economy. It hurts us very bad. So we had a huge crash in the news job industry. According to the local news initiative, we have lost more than 270,000 news jobs since 2005.
Oh my gosh.
And if you look at that, that's a 75% loss. So pretty much the industry is pretty much wiped out from digital media kind of.
It's really awful.
And another aspect of this loss is, a lot of these local newspapers and things, they kind of got bought out by the big guys, So they kind of consolidated under corporate ownership. So they have a monopoly over a lot of the things that's going on. And I have here, according to the North Carolina's journalism school, since the early 2000s, at least a fifth of newspapers have shut down. And roughly 90% of them are controlled by those big guys.
Wow.
Yeah, so.
There's so much to unpack there with the loss of many jobs in the years since digital made its debut. It's no wonder that it has gravely affected how local journalism landscape and corporate ownership raises concerns about what and whose stories are being told and who's controlling the narrative.
Right. Because, if 90% is controlling all of it, they kind of control the story. They tell you what's being told. And then your local communities are left in the dark. So, it leaves many people in the dark. No news sources, nothing.
Yeah. One big issue is holding the local government accountable. Journalists are the ones who dig into what is happening in your area. They seek out the story that matters to the community. Journalists help to keep our city and government accountable. I mean, like you're saying, if there's nobody reporting on them, then they really can just do whatever they want, and
Literally
that's
anything.
concerning
That's very
because
scary,
that's
yeah.
not what we want as citizens of this great city,
Yeah,
Philadelphia.
it's super scary, and it's so scary. I mean, it's almost a reality. It's truly, truly happening. It combats the mis and disinformation.
Yeah, they can hide behind anything. Knowing what news is fake and what is actually real is a problem with the rise of technology that only seems to be growing. We don't just talk about the downfall of local journalism today, but we will want to share what is being done to combat these issues. In doing research, we found that there is currently a bill called the Local Journalism Sustainability Act, which would give consumers and or small business owners tax credits for subscribing to local news. According to Rebuild Local News, this initiative is meant to entice them to subscribe and save, in turn creating a bigger influx of revenue in local journalism. It also provides payroll tax credits to news outlets who employ journalists. This bill has not been fully enacted yet in law, but it is an amazing step in the right direction for our local communities and journalists alike. Let me ask you a question, Marcus. What is your favorite news outlet?
So like locally, for sure, would probably be like the Philly Inquirer, which I think is pretty much our biggest one.
Yeah.
But it's my favorite because I'm interested in like a lot of social movements, like protests, whatever.
Yeah.
And so anytime that stuff kind of goes down, I definitely tune into them. They're one of the first people
Yeah.
I look at to truly see what's going on. And so I'm going to ask you the same question: who is your favorite?
So, ironically, it's the same. I'm a Philly Inquirer girl. I have, it's broad spectrum and it gives you a full view of everything that's going on
So
from
much stuff.
national news to everything that's happening locally. And, tried and true, the Inquirer is the one. But I really enjoy like Billy Penn, and if I'm running to the train, the Metro is really good. So, because the Metro gives you a lot of like snippets. It's not the big long form articles that you're going to get, but Metro will really cover a lot of ground in a short period of time.
That's good.
And I really appreciate that.
Yeah. And I mean, as we're talking about that, I'm assuming that a lot of people might not want to subscribe to, their local newspaper because of they don't want to subscribe to anything. But what people have to realize is that it's 100% like factual evidence. It's true. And on the Inquirer, they have a you can pay $1 for 6 months.
Yeah.
Right now. So
Yeah.
it's like a deal. So you can go ahead, go try it out, go see how you like it, and so you can actually truly see what it's like to have access to, local journalism and actually support them as well.
Yeah. And especially if we get that tax credit, if that
Right.
bill goes through and people actually get a tax credit for following their local journalism, that would be awesome.
That's a perfect bill. We need
Right?
that.
Yeah, we definitely need that.
On that note, we would like to welcome our guest, Professor Nate House, to discuss more about the importance and evolution of local journalism. Professor House has been an educator with CCP since 2007. He received his bachelor's degree in journalism as well as his master's degree in creative writing from Temple University. Aside from being a highly sought-after professor at CCP, he is a published novelist, writing books such as Float and Clarence Pending. Professor House has also had an extensive career in journalism, writing for local newspapers like the Philadelphia Tribune, the Philadelphia Inquirer, and the Boston Globe.
Welcome, Professor House. How are you?
Welcome.
Good. Nice to see you. Thanks for
Nice to
doing
see
this.
you,
It's
of
really
course.
important.
Thank you for coming.
Sure.
Can you share with us a little bit about your background as a local journalist?
Sure. So, you all were talking about basically the digital disruption that happened. And so, being the smart money person that I am, I decided to study journalism in 1998. I graduated in 1998 as a older student. at Temple, which was a great experience. But as we know, 1998 was right before the digital disruption. So I graduated from Temple, and I was really fortunate to have great professors, Lynn Washington Jr., Elmer Smith from the Philadelphia Daily News, Vince Hill from KYW News Radio. And they were really influential in getting, in helping to get me jobs. And so my first job when I graduated, I didn't even graduate. I actually had my first job at the Tribune as I was a senior at Temple, working 2 days a week. So I got right into it, which was great. As we know, the Philadelphia Tribune, the longest running independently owned African American newspaper in the United States, went into that newsroom and I loved it. I loved every minute of it. I learned so much, from Temple, but sitting next to Kendall Wilson, award-winning journalist. I mean, there were like 12 of us in a room that's smaller than this, like crunched together, because even back then, even before the digital disruption, there were, financial challenges for newspapers. Yeah. So went to the Tribune, I did crime and courts, and I loved it. But even back then, when things were much more affordable and there were financial challenges, not the kind of ones that papers are facing today, I still had to wait tables on the weekends. So it was funny because sometimes I would cover a state rep on Friday morning and then wait, and then they would be at a table in a restaurant that Saturday night, and they wouldn't recognize me. They, why is a reporter waiting tables? Right. But we do what we have to do because we love it. From there, I went to, because of the money, I went to a magazine in Plymouth Meeting called Lotto People Magazine, which was all about the beauty of playing the lottery. Yeah. Really good business idea. And these people had deep pockets because they were some of the executives who used to run TV Guide. For those of you who don't know TV, do you guys know TV Guide?
Yes.
I don't.
Yeah.
It's like a telephone booth.
Yeah.
Anyway, TV Guide was the most popular magazine in the country. So these guys had deep pockets, and they thought that they could have a magazine that focused on the lottery and that it would be successful. Because they thought it would be successful, they paid me and a couple other writers double what we were making.
Good money, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Good money, better benefits, all that kind of stuff. So I went there, and it was really funny because, one, the lottery is not necessarily a good thing.
No.
I mean, it funds good things, but it's not smart, right?
Yeah. No,
so anyway, we did that, and they had us like doing like 3 stories a day. So as journalism students, it's hard to do 3 stories a day.
Yeah. About the lottery?
About the lottery. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Like all about people playing the lottery?
Well, it would be people playing the lottery. Like we would go to different places in Washington D.C. and Philadelphia, and the stores that sold the most tickets and try to make it a positive story. It wasn't. You know what I mean? It was like, a lot of those stores also sold liquor. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like they're trying to put a positive. Anyway, I'm ashamed. I did it. I did it for the money. But the reason they had us doing 3 stories at a time was because I think they saw that the digital disruption was going to destroy them.
Yeah.
So we did so many stories so that they could bank them, not publish them. They fired all the writers 6 months after we started, and the publication continued for another 2 years. Right? So I think that was kind of like one of the first times where I saw the effect of the digital disruption on a publication. A lot of people that was well funded, kind of had a really good business model, but did not foresee how that disruption was going to affect their business model. And that's just my own personal example, as you guys pointed out.
Of course.
All over the country that happened, magazines, newspapers, and it's still happening today.
Right. So with that, I appreciate that you keep referring to it as the digital disruption, because that's really what it is. Can you elaborate on that? Like, how do you feel that local journalism has been disrupted by digital? I think the Bulletin, so back in the day, right, we had 3 newspapers in Philadelphia that were printed daily, and some of them were printed twice, morning edition and evening edition. So we had the Bulletin, we had the Philadelphia Inquirer, and we had the Daily News. Bulletin was the first to fall. That fell before the digital disruption. Then you had the Daily News and the Philadelphia Inquirer. They ended up merging, right? So basically you had 2 newspapers for a while, but it was the same company. Now they say that the Daily News still exists, but it's really just Philly.com. You know what I mean? The Inquirer's website, and people like Will Bunch, they might still say they work for the
Philadelphia Daily News, but it's
Yeah.
pretty much the same company. So there's that. Also, we used to have the Philadelphia City paper, and we also used to have the Philadelphia Weekly that were kind of like weekly tabloids.
Yeah.
So they also shut down. You know what I mean? So I think the digital disruption, nobody saw it coming because of that phrase, digital dimes for analog dollars.
Yeah.
Have y'all heard that?
No.
So what that means is that when the web first started, all these publications, all these newspapers, like put a website up online thinking that the same business model that they've been using since 1900 in the penny press
Yeah.
would still exist, that they would make their money off of advertising. What they didn't realize is that the cost of a digital ad is 1/10 of a print ad, right? So they didn't realize, it is crazy, right? Because they thought that, $500 quarter page ad would be a $500 quarter page ad on the internet. It's not.
It's not, yeah.
And so they didn't foresee that. They also didn't foresee that digital advertising can be measured, right? Like John Wanamaker of Philadelphia once said, "I know half my advertising dollars are wasted. I just don't know which half," right? Back in the print days.
Yeah.
Now you know instantly somebody clicked on it.
Yeah.
You also know, did somebody buy the product, right? Now that it can be measured, you can say, well, I'm not advertising with them anymore.
Yeah.
Right, so that happened. Then there's the obituaries. People used to pay for obituaries in the paper. That's gone online. Craigslist destroyed the classified section. That used to generate a lot of revenue. So there are a bunch of forces that caused this digital disruption.
Yeah.
Locally, internationally.
You've made a lot of really good points, because even like on Facebook, there's marketplace, so people aren't even having flea markets anymore.
Yeah.
Advertising that in the paper, people used to do that.
Right.
So.
So with all of that, with the digital disruption, with the amount of like misinformation that can kind of go around today, like in today's climate specifically, why do you think that local journalism is really important, and why people should kind of care about it?
Well, I think we need to know what's going on in our communities. You know what I mean? And in order to be able to make good decisions. I mean, it's the cornerstone of our democratic system, right? So the way this affects, the way that the digital disruption affects local journalism is not only in the closing of those newspapers, but if you look at Philly.com, which I kind of have a love-hate relationship with, you know what I mean? I do think they are the best in the city, but also like they're not covering a lot of neighborhoods. They're not covering a lot of issues, right? And that's because their news staff has been decimated. You know what I mean? Like I don't think that they're doing, like if you look at the Philly.com, their website today, they have a great investigative piece about school officials in Montgomery County using taxpayer dollars to go on vacation. That's a really good investigative story. It's also Montgomery County.
Yeah.
Right? When you lose revenue, right? When you lose revenue and you lose staff, then you lose resources to do really deep investigative stories like the one about, I mean, I guess they did the one about Monco, but they should be doing that
Because it's not
in the city.
It's Philly.com, not
Right.
Monco.com.
Sure.
I mean, not that we don't want to know what's happening in Monco, but that's not our local homegrown.
Right.
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 So, okay, in your, I don't know if you maybe seen something, or, I mean, of course you know something, but how can local journalism impact the way our communities like impact and respond to things that maybe, I don't know, the school board made a decision. How does local journalism like change the response to something happening, if that makes sense?
So I think that's a really, really great question, and I have been thinking about examples where like a specific story causes specific action, right? And so here's a story from years ago from the Philadelphia Inquirer. I think it was the Daily News that did this story. Where they found that sexual assault cases in the Philadelphia Police Department were being treated like regular assault cases, right? And they went through like years and years of data, right, to determine that a lot of these cases that should have been investigated as sexual assaults were being, investigated and prosecuted as regular assaults, and that affects the investigation.
Absolutely.
So like right after that report came out, the Philadelphia Police Department, addressed it, changed its policies, things like that. So like that's an example from years ago. Another example I can think of is the Trayvon Martin story in 2012, right? That was a local story in an Orlando newspaper
Yeah.
that did not get national press until somebody, I believe it was at an HBCU fraternity member saw it and then shared it with all his people, and then it snowballed from there.
Yeah.
So, like, without local journalism, the Martin story may never even have
Well,
become a
probably
national
would've-
story.
Yeah, it probably would have just got swept under the rug.
Sure.
You know, because that was such a travesty. That entire story,
Yeah.
beginning to end.
And I think that the evidence of that is that it actually took a month for that story to become a national story.
Yeah. I feel like you see that a lot happen where a story, someone will share that. And I guess this is where digital does help when people are sharing their local news, because it does get it more widespread. Because you definitely do see that a lot where a news or a crime will get more traction once people start talking about it online.
Yeah.
But it has to start in your
Locally, yeah.
Yeah, locally in your has to be written about locally in a paper.
Right. And that takes resources.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think the people, like, as a community, we deserve to have local journalism. We deserve to, learn about the Trayvon Martin story, even though it's not here. Growing it like locally over there got it to us all the way over here. So us as people, we deserve local journalism.
To be informed.
It's that important.
What are some of the biggest challenges that local journalists face today?
I think it's money.
Money.
Money and resources. I mean, Philly.com has done a pretty good job of adapting and surviving. And one way they've done that is that because they've become a nonprofit.
Yeah.
The Associated Press, the world's most popular newswire, is now considered a nonprofit. So you're going to have to become a nonprofit. So I think there's that. I also think that there's a problem in how to attract audiences. Right.
Yeah.
And I think, in talking to my students here at CCP, they don't like the news. They don't watch the news. Even a lot of CMS students don't like or watch the news. So I think you're going to have to figure out ways to attract the younger audience.
Yeah.
Right. One example I can think of that's doing that, I think Studio 2 on WHYY is a really good example of how to attract, like, kind of like a new format. It's conversational. It's not all hard news. They don't subscribe to that. If it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah.
Construct. And also, I think they do some solutions-based journalism where, as journalists, instead of just pointing out how we're all going to hell in a handbasket, we say how we can get out of the handbasket.
Yeah.
So I think that's important. I also think it's really important to engage the audience in ways in which they feel like they are part of the process.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I would love to see more media organizations doing town halls, or even getting community members to write for them.
Yeah.
So I think attracting the audience, maintaining the audience, and also, as your question about what stories have actually resulted in legislative or community action is a good one, because, like, how do you keep the citizenry informed, but also how does that translate into action?
Yeah.
So I think that's a challenge.
And it's like you're saying, it's tapping also into what younger generations are, how they're interested in receiving their news.
Right.
We can't just expect them to get the same news that their grandparents were given, and because they're not the same people as their grandparents were. So we have to change the interaction between the reader and the writer. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
definitely.
because they're not going to take it the same way that, like, I would or you would.
Right.
We're not grandparents.
Yeah. Right.
But
Yeah.
it's important to make sure the reader is being given the information that is best suits them.
Right.
And it's
In order to
adapted.
keep them engaged. And that probably is a lot of the reason why it has fallen off so much over the past few years. Not just money, but, like, if we're not including the demographic of who our audience is, they're not going to take it in.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, thank you for your insights on the challenges. But as we all know, like, journalism, it's not completely dead. Like, it's still there, So, like, I kind of just want to go into, like, how can we help support local journalism? So a question I have here is, like, what role do you think people in our communities can actually play to support their local journalism news stations?
That's a good question. I think one of the things, you know, there's been a lot of talk about like the hyper local model, and like Patch tried to do it with AOL. Spirit newspapers tried to do it in Philadelphia, where they tried to put like kind of like newspapers in specific neighborhoods, and they did succeed for a while, right? And they're still in existence, but now they focus a lot more on Delaware County and West and Southwest Philly. So I would say to, and you guys brought this up before. One is pay for news, right? That's another challenge about younger generations is that they've been so accustomed, and I'm accustomed to this too,
Of course.
to not paying for news.
Yeah.
Right. And so it was so interesting because like back during the digital disruption days, we had the whole Napster controversy, which probably many young people don't remember, but you used to be able to download music for free on the internet. Apple Music, Spotify figured out a way to get people to pay for music, right? When they were getting it for free. Seems like people are willing to pay for music, but they're not willing to pay for news. So like as you pointed out, $1 for 6 months, it goes up after that, but be willing to pay for good news.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I would do is, even as, the publications that we talked about disappeared, new ones have arisen. Kensington has a newspaper. The South Philly Review's been around forever. We've had the Philadelphia Voice started within the last decade. We do have a lot of options here, but they're understaffed, right? They're underfunded. So if you like, if you like, the Kensington Voice or you like East Falls Local, those are also nonprofits, give them some money if you can, or offer to write a story for them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think that's one way to get involved. And, if you have a lot of followers on social media, you see a story in one of those hyper-local publications, share it with your people. I think that can be a way to support it.
That's great.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Do you know what paper is local to your area?
I don't think I know. I'm in Chestnut Hill. There's something.
Okay.
There's something.
The Chestnut Hill Local's been around for years.
Yeah, I know there's something.
Yeah, and I think they're still in print. I haven't checked, but they used to be in print.
We have the Northeast Times.
Northeast Times.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. We used to have the News Gleaner back in the day. But
Okay. So, is there anything that gives you hope in terms of local journalism, like something that you see coming up, or when young people maybe anything?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, I think in my classes, I see this real. I see two things. I see a real desire for. I see a real desire for unbiased, fact-based news from young people. I really see that. So that gives me hope, and I really love and share their frustration. You know what I mean? About how they feel like their voices are not, and their experiences are not reflected in both national and local news.
Yeah.
So that gives me hope because I think their desire for unbiased, both local and national news is inspiring. And then I think that they're going to be the ones who are going to better reflect the experiences of young people.
yeah.
Yeah. Maybe make a change. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think we're going to see, and I think I think we're already seeing kind of like a plateau of, do you guys know that like vinyl albums and board games
Are back.
are back?
Oh yeah, I know. I'm stacking up a collection myself actually.
That's great.
Yeah.
Like that fact right there gives me hope. And I'm not saying that we're gonna print newspapers,
Yes.
Again, but I do think that speaks to a desire for more tangible news.
Yeah. Just speak on that, so this generation of the Gen Zers, my 17-year-old son just burned CDs to sell. So they're really taking it back to the
To sell.
the 90s. But with that, it definitely taps into what you're saying about young people writing for themselves. They're making the news that they want, and they're going to ideally put it out there for our local outlets to partake in.
Right. So, that's all the questions that we have for today. I just want to thank you for coming on and sharing your expertise and your knowledge with us today on local journalism, because it truly does affect all of us more than we actually know. So I just want to thank you for coming on today. And yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for doing what you're doing. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Local journalism is one of the most important tools that we have in Philly. It is the place that we go to find out what is happening around us. Without local news sources, we will be unaware of how our city is being managed, our schools are progressing, or even whether or not there will be a concert on the Parkway this year. Right now, our local media outlets are in danger of losing federal funding. The viewers and subscriptions are down, which, as we talked about, harms our local news landscape. Picking up your local print newspaper, subscribing to its digital platform, carries a lot of weight, and supporting community-based news can make a huge difference. Both the reader and the writer can benefit from it. Thanks for tuning in to the 17th Take. I'm Marcus Bennett, a student with the Community College of Philadelphia's Communication and Media Studies program. I want to thank our guest, Professor Nate House, and I want to thank the viewers for tuning in.